Welcome to Tenacity with Sonia C, the podcast where we dive deep into the stories behind success, uncovering lessons learned and the insights gained by leaders and innovators in the business world. I'm your host, Sonia, and today's guest joining us is Victoria Pelletier. Victoria is an award winning executive leader known for her dynamic and unstoppable approach to life and business. From becoming a COO at the age of 24 to her current role as a CEO, author, and professional public speaker, Victoria's journey is a masterclass in overcoming adversity and leading with heart. She's here to share her insights on resilience, leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let's dive in and discover the secrets behind Victoria's tenacity and success. Hi, Victoria. Welcome to the episode. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. I'm excited to get started with you. So you've overcome a lot of adversity and trauma in your early age, and it's helped you build resilience. Can you share with us what were some of those traumas and adversities that shaped you to be so resilient?
For sure. I started sharing them much more openly, probably in the last decade or so, where I thought I used to kind of keep it compartmentalized and separate from what I did professionally and much more publicly. And I realize it's a big part of my why, if you will, like what propels me, what gives me purpose to be better, be more, than I was the day before.
Yeah.
And so for me, there's been significant adversity and challenge, but it starts with childhood trauma in that I'm born to a drug addicted teenage mother who was very abusive to me,
Mhm.
was in the child welfare system a couple of times. And then I'm fortunate, however, to have been adopted out of that environment into with parents who were, or at least my mom being the extremely loving one, lower socioeconomic position, however. So I started working at a very young age and have had a multitude of things since then. But those very early years very much shaped me in terms of learning to survive and then
Mhm.
to the point of thriving today.
Right. So how did how did it shape on your outlook and leadership and tenacity on life?
It's funny. I sign a lot of my social media posts with like two hashtags. One is unstoppable.
Okay.
And that's very much my like philosophy and life's mantra in that nothing is going to prevent me from achieving whatever goal or objective I have set for myself. I remember my mom, and my mom is the woman that raised me, not the one who gave birth to me, said to me, I think I was like 11. My nickname was Tori growing up, and she was like, "Tori, you need to do better than us." And she meant more socioeconomically because my dad was a janitor, my mom was secretary, and I reflect back on that, and then she never actually needed to say that to me because how it shaped me is that I was determined I would be better than the biology or the circumstance. And so when I think about from a leadership perspective, how it shaped me. And sorry, I didn't tell you the other hashtag, no excuses.
Okay.
Uh, and that's just stuff is going to happen. We can't always control that, but we do have control over the how we move forward. And so that's a little bit of where that no excuses. We take choice and action the way we think, we act, behave. Um, and so for me as a leader, I it's a few things. One, so the ability to lead large businesses that are changing consistently and challenge and adversity that comes up. So the ability to like weather through those storms, but also my own personal experience and trying to understand the whole human that shows up in front of me. Right? We don't get to park. I used to think you can park that trauma at the door, our personal challenges and lived experiences, and as we walk into work, we can't. It shapes us. So for me as a leader, I spend a lot more time trying to understand that whole person. What is their personal experience, lived experiences? If they come from a different background than me, let me understand that.
Mm,
So I understand how you show up each day and where I might be able to help coach or guide you and support you onto whatever their journey is.
yeah. I'm just curious, like with all the trauma and your upbringing, what like age or point did you sort of figure out I can't live my life based on my past. I need to like move forward, or does it creep up on you every so often?
I I don't know that there was ever like a conscious choice. I just think I was just never gonna let anything get me down.
Mm.
So beyond the abuse of the first several years with Julie, my biological mother, I had to deal with the fact that people made fun of my adoptive mom for being extremely overweight. The fact that there was no money for me to go on school trips. We never went on vacations. I hit my height. I'm only 5'8" and shrinking, I think, as I get older. But I hit
Mhm.
this height by the time I was like 10 or 11, and I
Oh
developed
gosh.
really quickly. Yeah, I was taller than my teacher by age 10, and those. So there was just like a constant like barrage of being ostracized for something or feeling like I'm different or I'm on the outside or I had all these experiences. So I don't think that it was ever this conscious choice. I do believe, and I spent a lot of time talking about resilience. There is a little bit DNA in there, right?
Mm.
Fight or flight. I'm a fighter. I think just naturally I'm a fighter. So there wasn't something that needed to switch on that regard. However, I do think you can build your muscle and improve ha the what I refer to as healthy resilience. I used to
Mm.
compartmentalize, not process it. I used to put up walls, like, that's not a healthy way to live, and
Yeah,
so that shift didn't start to come until I was well into my 20s, and then, like, really stepped into it confidently in my 30s.
okay. So you become a COO at 24, and then you progress to become a CEO at 41.
Mhm.
How did your leadership style evolve over the years, especially through such significant professional milestones?
I, um I realized, I guess technically I was a CEO at 20. I forgot about I bought my first business when I was 20. I used to act on the side and the casting agency that represented me, I bought when I was 20.
Oh, wow.
Um, and then, yeah, I was reflecting on it the other day. I was trying to count all the mergers and acquisitions that I've been a
Yeah.
part of. And that one, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was totally missing that one. It was my first one. Uh, and so I made a very, very bold, risky move to take that real executive role of a much larger company at 24 because I was a brand new mother as well. My older son was only a few months old. I was also leaving large bank, right?
Mm.
Which no job is secure, but there was significant security or feeling of that, and I was in a solid place there to take that role. And my leadership, I think I felt like I needed to show up in a very particular way. And because I was the youngest like leader around the table by probably 20 years, I was the only woman. And I'm actually part of the LGBT community. I was married to a woman previously. I'm now married to a man, but very confidently identify as queer. And I also have a trans male son. So at that point, I was like, oh my God, I'm the only one. Youngest woman, queer. I need to like prove that I've earned my spot here, and I didn't have the confidence to, as I said, I compartmentalize all the stuff that happened, and so I showed up with like these walls around me. I'm not going to demonstrate that I have significant emotion. I'm not going to show you vulnerability. Also, as a woman, there's a dynamic in large part also because of that. I found out a few years later that I had the nickname as the Iron Maiden, and
Oh,
that's
wow.
so my leadership, and I've never really been that person, but perception is reality, and I
Mhm.
was showing up that way. I didn't want people to think I was weak and vulnerable and all those things by bringing my whole self to work. I was very good at delivering business results, and I had great performance from the team, but to some extent, I think they probably feared me more than would have wanted to follow me.
Yeah.
So that shift came, as I said, I like leaned more into that healthy resilience is starting to be a little bit different in my late 20s and into my 30s. And that's where it became this really like intentional shift of like showing up as the whole human person, of engaging with people in that way, to the point that I now have a different nickname as the turtle. Now, my best friend gave it to me, but I originally met her in a work setting. And that is that tough exterior and shell. I'm extremely resilient, but the reality is you'll see the soft marshmallowy insides
Mm.
now because I let that come out because that builds connection and trust with people. So I've really shifted the way I lead and actually how I show up, and it's not any different at work than it is in my personal life.
I can totally relate to you because I remember in my late 20s, my nickname was the Rottweiler and Tinker Bitch.
Oh, I've never heard that one.
Yeah, because I'm tiny and I look sweet, but, there's so I think that's also part of the way I showed up or maybe perception, so I can totally relate to that. But how do you adapt your approach when faced with new challenges now?
I've had the good fortune, to and I'll say the good fortune to have moved around a lot. It's much more common now, but I'm a Gen Xer, but, like, the Gen Xers and the boomers didn't move, or as much as probably I have, and that is a part of being a part of close to 20 mergers or acquisitions for myself personally or the companies I've worked for, not to mention supporting clients with it. Because of that, I'm very comfortable at adapting to change, whether that's a new organization, a new role, new scope of responsibilities, or just like weathering the winds, whether it's economic conditions, COVID, those kinds of things. It allows me to really assess things quite quickly, and manage the change appropriately. Funny enough, I have actually, led when I worked for IBM a number of years ago. One of the teams that I led was the change management
Oh,
practice for
wow.
all of IBM in the Americas. So that ability to like flex and adapt to whatever's coming my way, and then communicating in a way that I get the team on board has been what's really helped me, not just in leadership, but again, dealing with change and like challenge that comes up from a business standpoint.
Okay. In your experience, how does a strong commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion within an organization influence its culture and success?
Oof. It is, for me, it's just been something I've been so committed to pretty much my entire life. I
Hmm.
think from the early days, that first executive role as being the only woman, young, queer, all those things, but also I was actually the COO of a BPO, business process outsourcing company. And back then, and maybe a little bit now, certainly in North America, those kind of jobs where it's outsourced call center work or whatever, that it wasn't always considered like a destination job. It's when you're like unemployed, you need to take something. You're a new immigrant to the company to the country. You need to be working, and so I had tons of diversity in the team, and so I actually started to, as much as I was the Iron Maiden, I've always been absolutely committed to like creating cultures of belonging from and embracing diversity. Over now, I spent a lot of time, and actually in the last number of years, I've been leading human capital businesses where we're doing like HR strategy and one of those pieces is around diversity and inclusion. And my message to business leaders is that it's no longer just the right thing to do, or sad to say for some, the tick in the box on like the ESG initiatives and scorecards that they have. It's good for business. It's a diverse workforce and board as well, for those that have boards,
Hmm.
is shown to be deliver both better top and bottom line results. Employees feel more engaged, so they're more productive, higher retention rates with them, uh, greater problem solving and innovation that comes with these diverse teams. And from a board perspective, you actually see like the risk threshold in terms of what's happening with that the business improves as well. So
Hmm.
I will tell people like stop talking about this as though again it's just something nice to do. The reality is it's incredibly good for business.
Can you share an actual example of a time when you actually included diversity, equity, and inclusion into a team? Like a real example that someone could sort of relate to. So, for those who don't know what all three mean and they're looking at, growing their teams with diversity, equity, and inclusion, or a business that will have that already within it, can you give some examples?
Well, let's tackle each of those three then. So, I mean, diversity is having a multitude of people with different backgrounds and experiences. We tend to think gender first and foremost, because that's one of the few that actually gets measured in our HR systems. And then it's the other things around race, religion, physical ability. It can be veteran status. It can be where did you live and work? What different kinds of environments? Are you neurodiverse? So hiring people with all of these different elements of diversity, and many people are intersectional. I'm a woman and I'm queer, right? So there's finding like the people that look like and come from different backgrounds than you. And so there's some intentionality. I use a phrase a lot around strategic intentionality,
Mm,
for the leaders and the business owners here, understand where you're starting from. You actually need to measure it to then create a goal to in moving the needle forward. The next one from an equity perspective is biggest one for me will be pay equity, but it's also around opportunity equity.
yeah.
today, the World Economic Forum did a study in 2023. That's the latest one around like pay equity. We are in North America, and we're the furthest ahead around the world. Still 60 years from pay equity from a gender perspective before we get to parity. And
Wow.
so recognizing that we need to be paying equally, but also opportunity
Hmm.
as well. And so for me, that as a leader, and this is where I tell your listeners, if someone with a diverse background, we're trying to bring them in. We list, I don't know, 10 requisite skills we say we want. It'd be ideal to hire someone who achieved 9 or 10 out of 10, but they probably look and feel like many other people around the table. And so you need to be intentional and say, I'm going to hire someone who's got, let's say, 7 of those and great potential and propensity to learn. My role as a leader is going to be to help coach and develop them to get from 7 to 9 or 10.
Mm.
So, and then the last one is just around inclusion. And so I think a lot of companies just look at the numbers, like, so what diversity do we have? And they normally look at that at just the entry level employees. People are often running out the back door as quickly as they come in the front because we haven't created an environment that's inclusive where people feel truly like they can be their whole selves and like they belong.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I mean, I'm a woman in tech, which is very male dominated space. And I was kind of floored by what this gentleman said. And he said, this whole thing around diversity and women in tech, he's like, I'm tired of it. My company, we've tried it, and every time we've hired a woman as a developer, they can't do the job the same way a man can. And so he just said, like, I've stopped this whole thing. It's nonsense. I'm not going about it anymore. And I was kind of like, well, there's so much I could say to that, but what would you say to someone who sort of is thinking the same thing?
Oh, I'd be worried that it's gonna be a challenge to change that person's mind,
Right.
or, he sounds like he's likely basing that off of a single or
Mm.
small sample set of experiences where it might not have worked out with a woman who's come into that developer role. Although I'd question, did she not have the skill or did you not have the right kind of environment that you were
Right.
creating? And as a woman who spent a lot of time in technology as well, we are very, very far from achieving like parity, and not only in pay, but like I, I'm not breaking any confidences. I'm going to say this by sharing this and who it was. But when I worked for IBM, I was leading a large strategy meeting, a team of other executives, and I walked into the room, and it was myself and one other woman and 40 men. Right,
Yeah.
like, this is a matter of like, this 5 years ago or something. So, I would tell, the podcaster that you were listening to or the guest that was on that show that they need to open their eyes and the aperture a lot wider, and
Mhm.
maybe they should be the ally that helps support that female developer, either improve her skills, help her integrate more effectively into the organization versus just saying, "I'm shutting this down."
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I also think that, listen, at the end of the day, there might be differences. They say women are more nurturing and, have more patience, can multitask. I don't know if that's true. There are differences between men and women. That's a given. But I'm also thinking, should a company's HR department have specific onboarding procedures for men, women, or should they all be the same? Should they be taking that into account right at the get-go?
Well, a few things on that. So one, I don't think it's solely the role of HR to create that inclusive environment or handle like diversity. They are the central point for reporting on it, setting and coaching and guiding the leadership, setting some policies and procedures and best practice, but
Mhm.
it needs to be owned by the leadership. Would be one. Two is I don't think that there's a different onboarding or experience for male versus female. I think if we're really creating an open environment where all people with a very different, like, again, set of experiences and diverse backgrounds can walk in there and feel welcomed, then
Mhm.
I don't think it's different. Now, that said, do you want to create policies that are different for like for women? Are you going to do something different, obviously, from a benefit perspective if they've chosen to become mothers? But equally, are you going to do the same for men who might want to, I took no maternity leave with my second one.
Mhm.
Like that was my choice.
Right.
But like, do you want to create that? What about for the queer people who have different ways of going about building their families? So that's the kind of thing in an onboarding experience to immediately make them feel welcomed and like this is an inclusive environment is speak to all that you do to support the multitude of like diverse persons within the organization and make them feel seen and make them feel like they belong and that there's policies and support systems for them.
Okay. Fair enough. You have a new book called Whole Human Leadership. Can you give us a sneak peek into the core message of the book and why it's crucial for today's leaders to embrace this approach?
Yes, yes. While I've been in career transition over the last many months, I decided to write two books. One
Oh,
is on
not one, two.
two. I couldn't decide, funny
You
enough,
know,
between
yeah.
I know. I'm not very good. My husband jokes. He's like, I think you're busier now than when you're like full-time employed. I'm not very good at being idle. And I couldn't decide between the two topics because they're both so important to me. So I decided to do one on personal branding. That one was released in January of 24. And the whole human leadership one will come out in the next number of months. And it's a little bit around what I've spoken to you about today in terms of my journey from like Iron Maiden to the turtle. And actually, I have an illustrator who's done like the book cover is a turtle, and it just talks about that evolution and how really important it is from a leadership perspective. And what I will say to your listeners, I know a lot of them are entrepreneurs, but for those that might not even be in a position of leadership, we're all leaders, regardless of hierarchy and title. So we have that opportunity to influence. And in so for leaders and building the right kind of like cultures in business, we need to show up as our whole selves. So, whole human leadership means things like being incredibly authentic. And so that's sharing our stories and our lived experiences. It means talking about emotions. It means being vulnerable. It means seeing the unseen employee. It doesn't mean there's a trade-off. This kind of leadership does not mean that there's a trade-off for strong business
Yeah.
performance. We still have performance management conversations, but we do it from a very different place in terms of how we engage with our colleagues.
Okay. Um, as I'm a big believer that we learn from our failures rather than just success. So I always try to ask this question to every single one of my guests. Can you share a time when you faced a significant setback in your career? How did you overcome it, and what was the most important lesson you learned?
Ooh, um, do you know, there's been a few, but I actually feel like I'm at that inflection point now, to be honest. Um, I mean, there's one many years ago. I think there's times where, I kind of hate the question, like, how do you have it all? Like people perceive that because I've been a successful executive and I sit on boards and, I've been married and I have children and all these things.
Hmm.
Yeah, you can have it all, not always at the same time, and it doesn't come without significant trade-offs. So there's one like I've made choices for significantly for my career, missed a lot of things in my children's like, lives. But when it really mattered, I made one significant change. My ex-wife passed away. We were divorced at the time and had shared custody of our two children that I gave birth to our two children when we were married. And I was in a role that had me traveling 80% of the time. And and I was still single at that point. With no family, I made a decision. And so I left a job I loved. I'd only been there maybe 18 months to take a role that wasn't necessarily as challenging for me, but had me at home majority of the time, less than 10% travel. So there's times when you make the right decisions for your family, and other times for business and for your career. And so
Hmm.
that's one. And the latest one is I probably wouldn't have left Accenture, the last company I was at, without a job to go to, although I thought I actually had one. And it's just given me a lot of opportunity to really sit and reflect on, what I want to do, the right kind of environment I want to be in. I'm very much focused on, the impact I have, not only in the work that I do, but in the people in the world more broadly. And that's also in part why I wrote the books that I did. So this has been another one of those moments for me. And there's been some challenge and bumps along the way. But it's allowed me to connect more deeply with myself, with family, with friends, and do some things that I had on my to-do list of, writing another book, or in this case, another two.
Okay, great. As the number one social seller and public brand worldwide per LinkedIn, what strategies have you found most effective for building a personal brand and engaging your audience?
It was, sorry, I should clarify. It was LinkedIn who gave me that title when I worked for IBM. So they ranked
Okay.
me as IBM's number one social seller worldwide. So social seller, and the way they measure that is a combination of your brand, your network, how you engage with the network. And subsequently, IBM asked me to develop the personal brand training for its executives. And I've been very focused on it since I got recruited out of banking into the world of B2B. Not just the brand of the business, but recognizing that people do business with people they like and trust and therefore want to do business with.
Mhm.
And so the success in branding is much more around representing, again, I'll use the whole human, and where I see people get it wrong. And this is part of why I wrote the book and do a lot of coaching on this is most people think it's just the what do you do and who do you do it for? And
Mhm.
that's, and that's the foundational. I will say there, I think there's 4 parts to a successful personal brand. And that is absolutely like step number 1 for sure. Around what's your subject matter expertise, the what you do, maybe the industry you do it for or you're known in. So that's one. But the next one is who are you as a person? How do you build connection with people? So
Mm.
storytelling. What do you
Yeah.
want to share of your lived experiences, your values, your interests, and your passions? The next one is what makes you different from people who do what you do. What makes you stand above? And by the way, number 2 and 3 can be really closely aligned. So, for example, I'm incredibly values driven, which is part of who I am. And I'm radically candid. I have no problem with a very open and direct communication and feedback, but from a place of care and compassion. So those are both a part, like 2 and 3 for me, but get really clear on articulating how you're different. And the last is legacy and impact. What do you want to be known for? So when
Mm.
I die, I don't want them talking about how successful I was in business, and all the mergers and acquisitions and the sales and revenue and profit. That should be a very, very small slice of the story. I
Mm.
want it to be around the fact that I left the workplaces, the community, and the world at large better when I left it than when I came in. And so start to think about that in your messaging. And so all of those together create a much more fulsome brand identity that would have people wanting to buy from you, hire from you, promote you.
Yeah, so like I was gonna have a follow-up, but you kind of already answered it. I was gonna ask like how important is personal branding, which you sort of answered, but I want to add to that. So like we live in a social era, right? And I'm finding lately more and more things that I listen to and watch. Everyone is saying the people are not watching content that is scripted and looks like it's been pre-done, 2, 3 months ahead of time. People want more authenticity. So can you just, since we're talking about personal brand, and I wanted to ask how important is it? I want to ask like how important is it, but how does it connect with being authentic, and how does it change the image of your company or your what you're doing?
Yeah, it's critically important, but I when I talk about what do I attribute a lot of my career success to, I talk about my resilience and overcoming adversity. I definitely talk about my ability to perform and maintain skills, but then it's personal brand. And then there's some others in there like the ability to create boundaries and those kinds of things. So
Hmm.
it's very, very important. Whether you're an entrepreneur, you're in corporate, whatever, like it's exceptionally important. I've even told, my kids who are almost 24 and in June 20 years old, like you need to be building it now. And it's
Yeah.
going to evolve and change over time. And going to your question around like authenticity, I mean, it's critically important. I think in the world, as you said, of like this very filtered world all the time, we want to build connection with those that we believe are authentic and we have shared commonalities, with. And so I think the very filtered world is great for a quick Instagram scroll, but when I go back to people do business. I say business, but in life with people we
Yeah.
like and we trust. And
Yeah.
so being authentic matters. And so I think when you're crafting this personal brand, as much as you build a strategy for how you're going to show up online, it's not like an actor, like a character you're building for yourself. It is you and it needs to transcend from this, screen that we stare behind to IRL as my youngest in real life, right? So
Yeah.
there's no different version of Victoria that you get in a different setting. Might I wear a t-shirt that has a swear word on it to the gym? That's funny. Yes. But I'm not going to post that on LinkedIn. But at the same time, I'm not afraid if someone did. You know what I mean? So it's
Right.
always the same version of Victoria. So I tell your listeners, like, be authentic and be like real. I mean, we're questioning everything we see online now.
Yeah, that's true. So with that, um, is does being authentic equal vulnerability? And if someone is, has fear of being vulnerable or being criticized, what's some advice that you can give them to sort of overcome that and still be authentic?
I think there's a lot of work that has to go into self-love first, and I speak from, like, very personal experience.
Hmm.
The walls I put up to protect myself was not a healthy way to live and thrive, and the attention I sought was external because it somehow validated me, and it wasn't until I started to love who I was authentically and all the crap that's happened in my backstory. So first of all, I'd say you need to start with some self-love here.
Yeah,
But then next, recognize, like, in when you build your brand and you try and build a network, you're don't try and be all things to all people
that's true.
because you can't. And so some people are not going to connect with your stories, with the things you like, the values that you stand up for. And that's fine. But I'd rather have people in my orbit that are aligned and like what I do. And we don't need to agree, but even just that they love that I'm principled and I'm valued and I stand up for that. So I'd say, like, go forward confidently in telling your story. And some people aren't going to like it. And that's fine. Surround yourself with the people that do.
That's true. Um, Reflecting on your career and your personal journey, could you share a moment of personal growth that was unexpected that significantly impacted your perspective or approach in life and work?
Mm. I told you there was a shift in my 30s,
Yeah.
and it was on so many things I think came together, and there were some really, really big decisions that I made. I made a decision to leave my ex-wife after we'd been together for 11 years and had 2 children together when I was 33 years old. Um, I subsequently changed roles not too long after leaving her. And her cancer came back. So she had cancer the first time when I was 7 weeks pregnant with our youngest,
Oh,
and
wow.
so went through that battle. And not long after we separated, we found out her cancer came back. And she fought it valiantly for several years and passed away 4 years after we had separated. And just like viewing what's really important. So between I made a decision to leave. Everyone was like, "Oh my God, you guys were the it couple." I just wasn't fulfilled. And so that was a decision for me that I felt selfish for making, and it hurt the family, but it's what I needed to do for me. And I hope now that I've been with my husband now for almost 10 years, or sorry, we've been together for over 10 years, married for 7. Um, my children see a different kind of relationship. And so I made that decision. But then also my view um, on success. I used to think, again, think of my origin stories of coming from nothing. Success in large part was defined by material wealth in my mind. I
Wow.
left her almost everything in our divorce. I started over 80,000. That's all she could buy me out of our properties and stuff. I'm like, I'm younger. I make more money than she does, and I have my health. And so the way I thought about success, the way I thought about leadership, how I engage with people, and realizing what was really important to me around health and family and how I engaged, that also shifted around purpose and impact and legacy and what I wanted to be known for. So then you will see I turn 48 soon. And so in this last 15 years, I've drastically changed, my outlook.
Nice. Okay. So before we wrap up, I have one last question for you. For our listeners who aspire to be in leadership roles or are passionate about making a positive impact in their careers, communities, life, what advice would you offer to help them navigate their journeys with tenacity and purpose?
Ugh, um, well, first thing I would say is leadership's not for everyone. And I think a lot of people think that has to be the progression, hierarchical, which comes with leading
Yeah.
more bigger teams. And it's not for everyone, and that is okay. Be a rock star individual contributor. So just evaluate if that's what you want. And then next is talking about the whole human leadership. To be really effective, and very much in this day and age, there's a very different expectation from particularly these, Gen Zers and upcoming that want something very, very different. And then
Mhm.
when you talk about tenacity, you're the CEO of brand, in this case, of brand Victoria, and my career, and the whole being unstoppable. Like you set your sights on as far as wide as you want to go, and don't let anyone tell you differently and make you feel guilty for those choices. Like I said, if leadership isn't for everyone, climbing the corporate ladder in an upward way versus going like laterally can be really, really rewarding as well.
Mhm.
And again, you're the CEO of you, and you'll figure that out. Chart your own course.
All right. Thank you so much, Victoria, for coming on and sharing your personal story, your journey, and giving us all of this wonderful advice. It was truly a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our guest, Victoria, for sharing her journey, wisdom, and the relentless spirit that has driven her to such heights of success. Her story is a powerful reminder that with resilience, leadership, and commitment to making a difference, there's no limit to what we can achieve. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery and inspiration. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and join our community on social media. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a review and tell me what topics you'd like me to explore in future episodes. Remember, the future belongs to those who embrace change and innovation with tenacity. Keep striving, keep innovating, and most importantly, stay tenacious in your pursuits. Thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to bringing you more inspiring conversations in our upcoming episodes. This is Sonia signing off, but as always, remember to chase your dreams with tenacity.